5 years ago, Cenats dressed like a regular kid from New York. Today, he's sitting front row of fashion shows and wearing clothes that cost more than some people's rent. If you look at Kai today, it's easy to forget that this is the same guy who was making skits in the Bronx wearing skinny jeans, graphic tees, Timbs, and whatever was popular at the time. Because the Kai you see today and the Kai from those early videos almost feel like two completely different people. And somewhere along the way, his style evolved. But what makes Kai's journey interesting isn't that he started wearing more designer. The interesting part is figuring out when he stopped dressing like everybody else and started developing his own style. Because when you look back at Kai's old fits, you can almost track every stage of his career through the pieces he was wearing. His early skit era, the streamer era, the Vivette era. Each era feels like it represents Kai's growth not only within fashion but within his career as well. So today, I want to go back through Cenats' style evolution and figure out how he got from here to there. When I look at Kai's older fits, what stands out isn't necessarily the pieces themselves, it's how familiar they feel. If you were around during the late 2010s, you've seen these fits before. Maybe you wore some variation of them yourself. The style wasn't unique to Kai. In a lot of ways, that's the point. Back then, he wasn't trying to separate himself from everybody else. He was participating in the same trends everyone else around him was participating in. And that's what makes these photos interesting now. Because it's easy to look at successful people and assume they always had something special. Like they always knew who they were. But these fits feel like someone experimenting. Someone trying things. Which makes sense because that's exactly where Kai was in life. His career was still taking shape, his audience was still growing, and the person we know today wasn't fully formed yet. And neither was his style. Looking back, these fits almost feel like snapshots of somebody in progression. Not quite where he started, not quite where he was going, just somewhere in the middle trying to figure it all out. As Kai's audience grew, something else started changing too. The environments he was spending time in. Early on, most of Kai's content was happening in familiar spaces. But as his platform got bigger, the world around him got bigger too. He was meeting different people, traveling more, getting invited to different events, being introduced to brands and spaces that probably weren't a part of his day-to-day life a few years earlier. And you can start to see those changes reflected in the pieces. Not all at once, not through one specific fit, but gradually. The wardrobe started expanding. Different brands started showing up. Different silhouettes started showing up. More references started showing up. One moment that feels particularly important in his evolution came during a stream where Kai and Bruce were comparing sneaker collections. What stood out to me wasn't either's collection, even though them shits were fire. It was how different the relationships with fashion seemed to be. Bruce approached the conversation like someone who had spent years immersed in sneaker culture and fashion, while Kai approached it more like someone whose collection had grown alongside his career. And I think that distinction matters. Because Kai's fashion journey doesn't really look like the journey of a traditional fashion enthusiast. It looks more like the journey of someone whose world kept getting bigger. As their opportunities changed, the fashion changed. As the people around him changed, the fashion changed. And by this point, the style evolution starts to become a lot more noticeable. Eventually, the conversation around Kai's style stopped being about access and starts becoming about presentation. By this point, the expensive clothes aren't really the story anymore. Lots of people have expensive clothes. Lots of people wear designer brands. What started changing now is the way everything came together. The funny thing about becoming famous is that eventually your clothes stop belonging only to you. At a certain point, every appearance becomes public. Every event gets photographed, every fit gets posted. And whether you care about fashion or not, that's going to change the way you think about getting dressed. The version of Kai making videos in his neighborhood wasn't dealing with that. The version of Kai attending Fashion Week is. That's a completely different reality. One day you're throwing on whatever makes sense, the next you're showing up to events alongside musicians, athletes, designers, and celebrities. And that's where the shift starts to become visible. Not because the clothes suddenly become better, or not because the brand suddenly become more expensive, but because presentation becomes part of the job. The outfit starts feeling more complete, less like individual pieces and more like full looks. There's a difference between buying clothes and building an image. And somewhere along the way, Kai starts becoming much more aware of that distinction. You can see it in the way that things are styled, and the events that he's attending. You can see it in the people he's surrounded by. Fashion isn't operating separately from his career anymore. At this point, it's become part of it. And that's why the recent fits feel different. Not because he's still experimenting, because he seems to have a clear understanding of how he wants to present himself. The clothes matter, but the consistency matters more. What stands out now isn't any single brand or outfit, it's the fact that everything feels connected, like the image has finally caught up with the success. The clearest turning point in Kai's relationship with fashion came when he released a video called I Quit. At first, the title made it seem like he was walking away from streaming, but the actual announcement was that he was starting his own clothing brand, Vivette. And that changes the direction of this story. Up until then, most of Kai's fashion journey had happened through what people could see him wearing. The older streetwear fits, the growing sneaker collection, the designer pieces, and eventually the more polished looks at public events. Vivette is the first time we really get to see what's happening behind the clothes. In this video, Kai talks about not wanting to ignore goals simply because people primarily know him for streaming. He then travels to Italy and documents parts of the process behind producing the brand's denim, including learning more about how the garments are actually made. That detail is important because this does not look like him simply attaching his name to merchandise and moving on. He is placing himself in an unfamiliar environment and trying to learn the language of design, manufacturing, and construction. Whether Vivette eventually becomes a major fashion label is something we cannot judge yet. The brand is still new, but its place in Kai's style evolution is already clear. Earlier in his career, fashion was mostly something he participated in. He followed trends, gained access to more brands, and slowly became more intentional about his image. Now he's asking what his own ideas would look like as clothing. That is a much bigger step than buying a better outfit. It means his interest in fashion has moved beyond personal presentation and into creative ambition. The teenager wearing whatever was popular at the time is now traveling to Italy to study production for a brand of his own. And even though these two versions of Kai look completely different, one eventually led to the other. So after looking at every stage, what version of Kai actually had the best style? In terms of polish, consistency, and overall presentation, it is probably the version we are seeing now. But saying Kai simply got richer would miss most of what happened. The earlier fits reflected the environment he came from and the trends surrounding him at the time. As his career extended, so did his access to sneakers, designer clothing, and completely different social spaces. For a while, the wardrobe seemed to grow faster than the identity behind it. He had more options, but he was still working out how those pieces fit together and what kind of image felt natural to him. That process became more visible as Kai moved beyond YouTube and streaming. Public appearances required a different level of consideration, and getting dressed was no longer only about what looked good on camera for a video. The clothes now had to represent him in groups where fashion, celebrity, and business regularly overlapped. Then Vivette took that interest somewhere new. Instead of only being known for the brands he wore, Kai began developing one of his own. That does not automatically make him a designer or guarantee that the brand will succeed, but it shows how much his relationship with clothing has changed. Fashion started as something that reflected his surroundings. Success gave him access to more of it. Experience helped him understand how he wanted to present himself. And now he's beginning to explore what he might contribute to it. That is why the current version feels like the most complete one. The outfits are not simply more expensive than before. They appeal more connected to the person wearing them and the position he occupies today. Still, the older looks matter. They allow us to see that this was not an overnight transformation or one dramatic makeover. It was a gradual process happening alongside his career, documented through years of video, streams, photographs, and public appearances. Kai's style evolved because Kai's world evolved, and his wardrobe gave us a front row seat to the entire journey.